turns out that the biggest danger in the cyberpunk fantasy world of Shadowrun Chronicles Boston Lockdown isn't dragons, reckless gang members or shady corporations. It's not even orcs with flamethrowers. The real danger is lag. Horrible, game-crippling lag, and for an online-only experience, that's a pretty big problem. Things start off reasonably promising. Character creation is robust and gives you the freedom to create basically whatever horrible abomination you want from Shadowrun's various fantasy races. You want to play a troll wearing Mad Max armour, a roadside stop sign and carrying a big concrete club? Go ahead. Gruff, beardy dwarf wearing hot pants and jumping a cigar? No problem. There's a huge wardrobe of cosmetic clothing that can be cycled through whenever you're in a hub zone, so making a cool or crazy looking character is as easy as pie. I'm also a fan of the familiar Shadowrun Karma tree, which is basically your XP progression path. There's a variety of different skills to choose from rigging, which is basically controlling drones in battle, to summoning creatures, wielding shotguns and blunt weapons. Each separate skill tree eventually branches off into two paths, each offering a slightly different take on the same core abilities. One of the great joys about this RPG system is that it doesn't force you into rigid classes. As in any team-based game, specialising in at least one area is probably a good idea, but you are essentially free to play the character you want to. My main problem with the system in Lockdown is that a few skills have lost some of their flavour. Rather than hacking into the matrix, decking is now essentially a form of magic with a roster of damaging and debuffing spells. Magic in general lacks complexity and ends up feeling a little bit bland, like you're just hurling different coloured fireworks at people. Though I have to admit that dropping a spirit bear summon into a group of hive scum and watching him maul them to shreds is a pretty good time. Despite those minor flaws though, for the most part developing your character is a lot of fun, and the game's turn-based combat system is functional and enjoyable. Enemy AI is generally pretty smart, making good use of flanking attacks and tactical items, and on the larger maps, just getting to your objective is an impressive achievement. It does feel and look a little bit cheap though. There's an attempt at XCOM style kill cams that typically show little more than your character's flatly textured arse, and skills and sound effects are often disappointingly underwhelming. Shotguns, for some reason, are tiny. I don't know why that stood out to me, but it looks like my dwarf mechanic's holding a child's popgun. Sounds a bit like it too. And I'm also not a huge fan of the lack of an Overwatch ability. I understand developer Cliffhanger's reasoning, not being able to turtle up forces players to adopt a faster paced, more ambitious style of play, but it's still frustrating to see enemy gang members nonchalantly wander up behind you and splatter your brains against the wall, when a decent reaction shot could have easily dealt with them. The biggest killer, however, is the game's unreliable servers. Things have improved in the last few days thanks to regular server resets, but I still have had long stretches where the game was essentially unplayable. Orders would take up to 10 seconds or longer to register, which, as you can imagine, doesn't do much for the flow of combat. Disconnections have also unfortunately been pretty common. All this is death to a game that requires you to be online at all times, even when you're playing solo. Cliffhanger has been working tirelessly on improving performance, but as of this review, you should go into Lockdown expecting frequent disruption, and that's really not acceptable. Still, I could put up with a few connection issues if the story and world hooked me in, but unfortunately Lockdown's take on the Shadowrun universe is a pretty limp and lifeless one. The dialogue and the voice acting are generally fine, but basic presentation and a linear, forgettable plot struggle to capture the pulp charm of the property. It suffers very badly from a lack of memorable characters and some unremarkable writing. Perhaps after playing Harebrained Scheme's clever, funny take on the universe in Shadowrun Returns and Dragonfall, I'm feeling a bit spoiled. But Shadowrun's a setting that features ancient dragons running worldwide conspiracies, dwarves in leather jackets and chain-smoking trolls. I just shouldn't be this bored. You could argue, of course, that Lockdown is intended as a multiplayer game rather than a compelling single-player RPG, but even with that in mind, there's nothing here that really stands out as particularly exciting in the game's multiplayer options. Fans of the setting will have fun teaming up with friends to take on story missions, and the game does a decent job of making grouping up nice and easy, but there's little sense of a real social community. The main hub is a dull box packed with static NPCs, and though the community is helpful and friendly, there's little to do other than head off to club more bandits unconscious, and that gets old pretty quickly.
Hey Buster, you packing your things?
Even without frequent server issues, Shadowrun Chronicles Boston Lockdown would be hard to recommend to anyone but the most rabid fans of the setting. Even they would be better served seeking out superior adaptations. Lockdown commits the worst crime of all, which is not being terrible, but being boring. Given free rein to go wild in such a ridiculous, lively setting, it's desperately disappointing to see such a lack of character and inventiveness in both the game's world building and storytelling. Yes, it is the only way you can play a Shadowrun game with friends, but really, it's only got repeated use of a mostly competent combat system to offer, and this is a setting that should be about so much more than just that. In a world where the director's cut of Shadowrun Dragonfall exists, I just can't see a place for Boston Lockdown. Game Watcher gives it a disappointing 5 out of 10.